Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel, Terror Tales. In this video, I will tell you 3 scary stories that happened at a gas station. And this starts with the first story called, The Night Shift. The story starts in a quiet night at the gas station, and the only sound was the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. Tom had been working the night shift for months, but he never got used to the eerie silence that settled in after midnight. He tried to pass the time by reading a book, but his mind kept drifting off to the dark corners of the gas station. Suddenly, the bell on the door jingled, and Tom looked up to see a man walking in. He was tall and skinny, with a weathered face and a scruffy beard. He wore a worn-out leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled down low over his eyes. "Evening," Tom said, trying to sound friendly. The man nodded and walked over to the snack aisle, where he started browsing the selection of chips and candy bars. Tom watched him for a few moments, then went back to his book. But something about the man made Tom uneasy. He had a strange aura, like he didn't belong in this world. Tom couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt like the man was watching him, even though he was facing the other way. After a few minutes, the man walked up to the counter and placed a bag of chips on it. "That'll be $2, Tom said, trying to sound casual. The man handed him a crumpled bill and said, "Keep the change." As he was leaving, Tom noticed that the man had left his bag of chips on the counter. He picked it up and called out to the man, but he was already out of sight. Tom shrugged and put the bag of chips back on the shelf. He was about to go back to his book when he heard a strange noise coming from the back of the gas station. It sounded like a scratching or scraping sound, like something was trying to claw its way through the metal door. Tom hesitated for a moment, then slowly got up from his chair and walked towards the back. As he got closer, the noise grew louder and more frantic. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he reached for the door handle. Suddenly, the noise stopped. Tom froze, his hand still on the door handle. He waited for a few moments, but there was no sound except for the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. He took a deep breath and opened the door. Nothing. The room was empty, except for a few boxes and crates stacked in the corner. Tom looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. He shook his head and closed the door. As he was walking back to the front of the gas station, he noticed that the man's bag of chips was back on the counter, even though he had put it back on the shelf. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around, but there was no sign of the man. He didn't know how the bag of chips had gotten back on the counter, but he knew that something was wrong. He decided to call the police, just to be safe. But when he picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. He tried again, but still nothing. That's when he heard the sound of footsteps coming from outside. Heavy, slow footsteps, like someone was walking through wet mud. Tom felt a knot form in his stomach as the footsteps got closer and closer. Then the door opened, and the man walked in. But he wasn't alone. Behind him was a horde of creatures, with twisted faces and long, bony fingers. They swarmed into the gas station, their eyes glowing in the dark. Tom tried to run, but they caught him before he could get out. He screamed as they dragged him into the darkness. The second story is called, The Hitchhiker. At the beginning it was a dark and stormy night, and Mary was driving home from a friend's house. She had always been afraid of driving alone at night, but she had to work the next day, and she didn't want to stay over. As she was driving down the highway, she saw a figure on the side of the road. It was a man, with his thumb out, hitchhiking. Mary hesitated for a moment, but then she remembered her mom's warning about picking up strangers. She drove past him, but then she felt guilty. What if he was stranded? What if he needed help? She made a U-turn and drove back to where the man was standing. He was tall and thin, with a scruffy beard and a backpack slung over his shoulder. "Can I give you a ride?" Mary asked, rolling down the window. The man nodded and climbed into the passenger seat. "Thanks," he said, his voice low and raspy. Mary tried to make small talk, but the man seemed distant. He didn't say much, except to give her vague directions to a gas station a few miles away. As they pulled into the gas station, Mary noticed that it was deserted, except for a lone attendant inside the booth. The man got out of the car and walked over to the booth, leaving Mary alone in the car. She felt a chill run down her spine as she looked around the empty gas station. She tried to shake off the feeling, but she couldn't help feeling like something was wrong. A few moments later, the man got back in the car. "Let's go," he said, his voice even lower than before. Mary started the car and pulled back onto the highway. But as they drove, she noticed that the man was acting strange. He kept looking over his shoulder, as if he was afraid of something. Suddenly, he grabbed the steering wheel and yanked it to the side. Mary screamed as the car careened off the road and into a ditch. The man got out of the car and started walking away, leaving Mary trapped inside the wrecked car. She tried to call for help, but her phone was dead. As she sat there, shivering and alone, she heard a strange noise coming from the darkness. It sounded like a howl, but it was unlike any animal she had ever heard before. Then she saw them. A pack of creatures emerged from the darkness, their eyes glowing in the dim light. They surrounded the car, their twisted faces contorted in a gruesome snarl. Mary knew that she was in trouble. She closed her eyes and braced herself for the worst. But then she heard a gunshot, and the creatures scattered. She opened her eyes to see the gas station attendant standing over her, a smoking gun in his hand. "Get in my car," he said, his voice gruff but reassuring. Mary stumbled out of the wrecked car and got into the gas station attendant's car. As they drove away, she looked back at the gas station, but it was already gone.